Welcome to the No Truth Without Beauty Discovery series. Let's hear what author Lina Al-Ali has for us. Is it true that husbands can hit their wives for disobedience?
There's this verse that has been quite controversial, shall we say, in the Qur'an, and it's been much talked about. It's quite a long verse. There are a number of issues or a number of terms in it that have interpreted in such a way as to be not very positive, shall we say, for women. I won't cover all of them, but we'll talk about the term that means hit, which has been taken by some to mean that husbands can hit their wives. Traditionally, the interpretation has been for disobedience. I want to say upfront, though, that despite this interpretation, which has stood for a very long time now, despite it, throughout history, all of the scholars and the religious leaders have been adamant that this is not a carte blanche for husbands to strike their wives or hit their wives whenever and whatever. And traditionally, they have taken the side of a woman, a wife, when that has happened. Now, back to this verse though. One of the things I've talked about quite a bit in my book, and I believe I've mentioned a number of times now in these episodes, is that we must read a verse in its entirety. We must read the verses just before it and the verses just after it. And we must look in the Qur'an for other places where the same topic is dealt with. And this is an absolutely crystal clear example of how the meaning of something can change dramatically, be turned on its head if we are thorough in that way, and we give the Qur'an its due in that way. And so this verse, for example, that does say you can strike your wives. Let's leave it there for a moment. If we continue and read the verse just after it, we find that God is saying, but if you fear a breach between the husband and wife, send a mediator from his family, a mediator from her family. If they can make up, bring them back together. And you say, wait a minute, but if he just told the husband that he can hit his wife, how can God be then saying, go to mediation after the hitting has taken place? So it doesn't make sense at all. And then you say to yourself, well, let's go back and look at it more carefully. What have they done? And you find that there's this word, which is in Arabic, nushuz. This is the word that has been translated in this verse traditionally to mean disobedience or rebelliousness, etc. And then, because I've read the Quran so many times in my life, I thought that I've seen this, I know this word from somewhere else in the Quran. And in fact, there is another verse in the Quran that uses this word nushuz, and it's in the same chapter 4, entitled Women. And in that case, it's talking about the men. So in this verse, it's talking about the women who commit nushuz, and in that case, it's talking about the men when they commit nushuz. Here it's translated as disobedience or rebelliousness by the woman. And over there, it's translated as something much more benign. And then you put the two verses next to each other. And besides the fact that they're the only two verses that use that word, that refer to that word, you find that there's a symmetry in the language as well. So here we're addressing it when it happens with men, and there we're addressing it when it happens to women. And then the context in which that verse occurs for men is that same context that we discussed before, where it comes within a set of 4 verses where God is talking about orphans, when men are allowed to take a second and a third and a fourth wife from the orphaned women, the bereaved and widowed women who have no protectors. It's within that context that it is discussing that, and it goes on to say basically that if a woman fears the nushuz by the man, meaning that extra marital or let's call it promiscuous act, although it would be legal in that case. That is the context. That is what it's talking about. So when it comes to women, it is clearly talking about women when they commit an extramarital act. In that case, it can never be legal because women are not allowed a second husband. So it's a promiscuous act. So nushuz means a promiscuous act, but we can't call it outright adultery because it would be adultery in the case of the woman, but it wouldn't be adultery in the case of a man. And then you go, so this is talking not about a husband and wife disagreement. This is addressing society as a whole, whereby, there has been an open and proven act of adultery. And so what God is counseling there, which is quite extraordinary, is that despite the fact that this is known, which means that there would have been witnesses, and despite the fact that, this is happening, God is saying, counsel the women, admonish them, and if they heed your counsel, meaning if they are repentant, then do not look for a way to harm them. And if they seek reconciliation in the next verse, then appoint a mediator between them, etc. So in other words, the hit them is in the case of an unrepentant wife who stands by her adultery, shall we say, and it is counseling basically society, not the husband, as to how to deal. So it's a case study basically in how to apply the penalty for adultery. Now, a moment here to talk about that penalty, because we have traditionally thought of it, and in English we refer to it as flogging. And flogging conjures up, awful corporal pain and harm and lashes and all the rest of it. But historically, they actually used clothing or slippers. And the Qur'an instructs that there be a small number of people to witness that, not a public spectacle, a small number of people to witness that. And so what you get from that is, the point is public shaming, not corporal harm. So, this is a very, very different sort of understanding that you come to when you do this thorough exercise that I have urged people throughout the book to do before sort of zeroing in on one verse or very often one phrase within a verse or one sentence within a longer verse.
So what about the talk of virgins in paradise then?
Yes, this is quite a strange one. The Quran speaks of purified spouses in heaven for everyone. And the concept of purity, which in Arabic in the Quran appears as either tahara or zakat, for those who speak Arabic, that concept is used throughout the Quran, or that term is used throughout the Quran to refer to a number of things, but never to virginity, not physical virginity. It's used to refer, for example, to the souls of God's prophets, the purity, the purification of the souls of God's prophets. It's used to refer to people who are on a righteous path. It's used to certain acts like the giving in charity to the poor. That's what that term means. And yet we find when it comes to descriptions of paradise and the fact that everyone will have purified spouses, we will all have purified spouses. Suddenly, when it comes to women, that term takes on this very narrow and limited meaning of physical virginity, sexual virginity specifically, in the case of the female. And it's really quite strange because both men and women are promised purified spouses, and in the description of purified spouses we are told that we will be of equal age and quality. It's a strange term that has been interpreted to mean of equal age, meaning re-gifted youth and eternal youth, and that applies to both. So it's unfortunate that that term has been narrowed down, and it's been narrowed down to mean this biological state in the case of women in particular, in a pretty flagrant way, because in other descriptions of the Qur'an, where the reference is not specifically to women, although sometimes the reference is specifically to women in paradise, but it's a reference to people in paradise, where they are described to be, people are described as being, glorious, and mates, everything is in pairs. Mates are described as being glorious and of equal age. Unfortunately, and quite shockingly, some English translations will translate glorious into something sexualized as pertaining to women specifically, either as voluptuous or something a little bit more graphic than that, which is really, very, very telling, I think, culturally, and rather disappointing. Now, the Quran also speaks of beings in paradise that are called hur, or huris in English. And that refers to, so there are earthly people, there's us, who make it, and with our spouses. And then there are heavenly beings, because not everybody will have an earthly spouse to be reunited with. And so there are huris, heavenly beings, for both men and women, so that nobody will be alone. The concept of two is very big in the Quran, and this all kind of feeds into how it really is very much about monogamy when it comes to human relations and the intimate side of relationships. And these huris have been taken traditionally to refer only to female heavenly beings, not to men. But it's inconceivable because, single women, to speak, in modern terms, will also need hurs to pair up with. And, it's interesting because we know from reports that the prophet, who was very handsome, of course, he was described by a woman during his time as being huri-eyed. Because he was so handsome, he had beautiful eyes. So it's inconceivable that she would have described him as being effeminate if Hur referred only to women. But besides that, I tell that because it's a nice story. But besides that, we know that everyone will be paired up. Now it's very telling, though, how the whole interpretation of descriptions of paradise have been geared that way. And I think this is something that we really have to be honest about as societies. There are verses that refer specifically to female huris in heaven. But even there, what we've done to those verses is really quite telling. For example, the Quran speaks of female huris in palatial pavilions. Now, a lot of translations, they don't call them palatial pavilions. They say in pavilions where these female huris are restricted, confined, restrained. And the reason they do that, or the way they have justified that, is because the noun for palace, which in Arabic is qasr, can also be, or is also a verb in Arabic, which means cutting short or limiting, etc. So they have taken these wonderful descriptions of paradise where we will have no cares, all our troubles will disappear, where we will live, happy forever, etc. And they have introduced this element of confinement for women within heaven itself. Really. But here we have it, and we now, we have access to so much information now. We hopefully will all revisit all of these unfortunate assumptions that have been propagated time and again. I also want to mention that there is a verse that refers specifically to female huris, and it says that they are untouched by man or jinn. The Quran addresses both humankind and another species called the jinn, which is an invisible species to human beings that the Quran makes clear that book and this religion is sent to both. And it's where the term genie comes from in English, actually. And again, there, when you read it in context, you realize that what God means there is that, these heavenly beings will be, because they are heavenly beings, right? They will be untouched by imperfections of all kinds, but unfortunately, again, that lofty concept of untouched by the imperfections and weaknesses of humankind and jinn, these two species created by God, that has been narrowed down to refer very simply and directly and crudely and narrowly to, these houris being untouched physically or sexually, which is, unfortunate. We've come to the end of our 4 episodes. I want to thank you for having joined me on this journey. I hope I've given you a sense of what my book, No Truth Without Beauty, God, the Qur'an and Women's Rights contains. I hope you will find it interesting, inspiring. This was very much a labor of love. I hope it brings comfort, provokes interesting conversations, and I'll take this opportunity also now to wish everybody Eid Mubarak. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Hope this episode has enticed you to discover the book No Truth Without Beauty, God, the Qur'an and Women's Rights for yourself. All links are available in the description box below this video.